The huge folly of postponing the elections considerably diminished the democratic element in the National Assembly, which, instead of feeling itself united, confident and strong, was from the very outset uncertain, distrustful of itself, irresolute and divided. Hence the critical situation in which they beheld at that time the Republic and society. A deliberately reactionary party which would not have existed had not its creation and development been provoked as if on purpose, is rapidly organising. It is turning to its own account material interests, the nature of which it is to be blind and violent egotisms, and the resuscitated hopes, enterprising and intriguing of the various dynastic factions and of the theocratic faction. All these elements constitute a formidable coalition in which intrigue is organising the resistance of those interests which can only so easily mislead and impassion. The Jesuit element, that mysterious army at the service of obscurantism, despotism, and social retrogradation, has thus suddenly found allies in those who but yesterday fought against it. Under the Restoration, it had on its side in France only the party of the emigration. Under the monarchy of July, it had indeed enlisted among its allies the official and satisfied bourgeoisie, which entered into covenant with it in its retrograde tendencies. Jesuit, as right majority, supported the general tendencies of Jesuitism, and formally yoked themselves to its cause by pledging the policy of France to the service of the Sonderboot. Today, a new stratum of French society has passed over to the enemy, to the fear of progress and of democratic and social principles. A stupid and fatal fear, for interests can only be saved by the alliance with sentiments and principles. This new retrogression is authenticated by this token that M. Thiers, who was what is called a tactician, a practical man, a man of manoeuvres, and his organ, the Constitutionnel, have, with brazen fronts, gone over to the party of which they had long been the bugbears. M. Thiers, moreover, maintained a few days ago in a committee of the Assembly, amidst the applause of many liberals of yesterday, liberals now entrusted with the task of founding the Democratic Republic. Don't forget that's in that era in France, etc. At that time. That it was very dangerous to develop the instruction of the people, because instruction led infallibly to communism. The anti-democratic coalition was bound up with the National Assembly, and the compact was signed between all the parties of the past. Out of doors, the movement is being organised by the insidious arts employed to terrify and blind the most legitimate interest. Furthermore, the reactionists would rapidly use up all the men of the revolution. Then, when the industrial and commercial crisis shall have passed away, they would again repossess themselves of the powers of the state, and with the help of the confederated enemies of liberty and progress, they would re-establish society on its old principles. The mischievous nature of the new principles being definitely proved by the evils which the invasion has for 60 years let loose on the modern world. That was the plan. It was a general coalition of all fears, all egotisms, and all intrigues against the legitimate and regular development of democracy. That is literally the very same purpose as that aimed at by the Company of Jesus. Accordingly, the alliance had been already concluded with the political representatives of the company, VC, and that was quite a long editor's preface. Introduction. 1. There is no one but has devoted some attention to the reappearance of the two famous Company of Jesus on the European stage. Many have rejoiced at the event. A greater number have beheld it with deep sorrow or irritation. To say the truth, there were various reasons why a fact of this nature should interest governments and nations. For if ever the aim of that audacious order could be achieved, every right and every liberty would be at an end. The author did not think he exaggerated in expressing himself thus. On the contrary, he was strongly persuaded that those who read the disclosures made in this work would share his opinion. And he asked, let him be permitted in the first place to enter into certain personal details before he proceeds to initiate the public into the secret he's about to divulge. He will be as brief as possible. In 1813 he voluntarily quitted Piedmont, his native country, went to Switzerland and settled in Geneva. At that period nothing yet presaged the ascendancy which the Jesuits were soon to obtain in the affairs of that republic, and the troubles in which their intrigues were to involve various other parts of Europe. Yet the author did not hesitate to say openly to a great number of persons what there was to be apprehended in that way. He was not believed. His predictions were universally regarded as dreams. In vain he repeated to them that he possessed proofs of the invisible snares and most secret projects of the company. A contemptuous smile was the answer to his words. Gradually the face of events was changed, and the first symptoms of Jesuit influence began to show themselves in Prussia. Everyone knew the commotion caused by the question of mixed marriages raised by Archbishop of Cologne and his ultramontane pretensions. A powerful party and celebrated writers, Courriers among the rest, declared themselves the prelate supporters and undertook the defence of doctrines which had long been considered dead. At the same period, pompous announcements were made of the conversion of princes and princesses, high personages of all kinds, learned men and artists. Such events were talked of with amazement in every company. The author happened to be one evening at the house of Mr. Hare, an Anglican clergyman, when a number of distinguished foreigners were present. The conversation ran exclusively upon the subject of these brilliant conquests, and everybody strove to invent some hypothesis of which to explain them. From what was stated of several of the converts by those who knew them personally, it was inferred that the real motive of their change was not precisely of a religious nature. The author declared that the conjecture was not erroneous, and he was thus led to lay before the company present the course of circumstances through which he had become in a manner an initiated Jesuit. A person who took part in the conversation and who was travelling under the title of Count expressed a strong desire to see some portion of the secret plan which had been mentioned. At his request, the author called on him next day and read him certain pages of the manuscript. He listened with great attention, seemed very much struck by some passages, and owned to him that at last he could explain to himself many enigmas. He asked the author to let him keep the manuscript for a day in order that he might study it more at leisure. This the author declined, and then he made known his name. He was a prince nearly related to the royal house of Prussia. The author persisted, nevertheless, in his refusal, though he offered him his support and even made him some tempting promises. The prince, somewhat to the author's surprise, requested him to give him a French version of the secret plan, that he might, as he said, have it translated into German. He recommended the author to observe the greatest discretion and insisted that he should not compromise his name. He was to deal only with his son's tutor on the subject. Furthermore, it was arranged that the author should subjoin an essay on the question pending between the cabinet of Prussia and the Holy See, wherein he was to demonstrate that the attempts made by various prelates, especially their attacks upon the university system of education and their growing audacity in enforcing the old maxims of Rome, were not a purely local and fortuitous manifestation, but a fact closely connected with a vast conspiracy pregnant with danger to all the powers. The author set to work and wrote an account of all the strange incidents through which he had become an invisible witness of the occult committee in which the Jesuit plot was concocted. As soon as he had finished the translation of the plan itself, which he sent off by installments, and just as he was about to enter on the conclusion, he was desired to stop short. The pretext alleged being the death of the King of Prussia, which had just occurred. He had even a good deal of trouble to recover the copy he had sent. This author. He was soon surrounded with people who obtruded their advice upon him, telling him that if aid was not afforded him towards publishing, it was for his own sake it was withheld, that he ought to be aware how he braved a society known to be implacable, a society that had smitten kings, or killed off kings. Who are you, they said to the author, to cope with such a power and not fear its numerous satellites? It's like a group of states, different little states, cities under it. Then gliding into another order of considerations, they would say nothing can be more dangerous than to initiate the people into such mysteries. It is enough that they should be known to those whose position authorizes and enjoins them to frustrate an ambition, which is the more enterprising and mischievous, inasmuch as religion and blind multitudes serve it as auxiliaries. These observations would have had less influence over the author had they not derived weight from the increasing anxieties of an aged and timid mother. Besides, his existence then depended on families who would have been deeply offended by a publication of such a nature. All this embarrassed his projects, and eager as he had been on his arrival to send a secret plan of the Jesuits to press, his many disappointments led him to postpone its publication indefinitely, though he could not conceal his disgust and despondency. During all this time, the influence of the Jesuits had augmented, and the liberals were beginning to regard it with apprehension. People came to the author with all sorts of solicitations, and so, notwithstanding his many disappointments, he was constrained in a manner by events and entreaties again to make ready for the press this long retarded work. But other obstacles again delayed it, for everything seemed to conspire against an enterprise for which, in a great measure, the author had voluntarily expatriated himself. The persons with whom he had come in contact for this business sought only their own interest, and wished to place him in such a position as would have entailed on him all the annoyance and dangers of the publication without any of its advantages. The Genevese government increased its perplexities by its persecutions. That government of doctrinaires, or Protestant Jesuits, so deservedly overthrown the year before, conducted itself on narrow, egotistical principles. And was particularly captious towards strangers. The author was several times summoned before its police on the most futile pretexts. For every little thing, right? Every little thing they can get him on, try to get him on. Unable to prove anything against him, they took upon themselves to judge his intentions, interpreted his religious and democratic ideas as a crime, and strove to intimidate him with threats of dire calamities. Threats, possible death, something like that. On his part, he ventured to predict for that intolerable government a speedy and ignominious fall. At last he was ordered to quit the country within the briefest space of time. He had to get out. He was told to leave, without any cause being assigned to justify that arbitrary measure. What were they kicking him out for? They weren't telling him. Thus a final stop was put in Switzerland to the publication of his work, which had already been rendered so difficult by all the obstacles that he just mentioned. 2. When he came to Paris in 1846, he had no thought of making fresh attempts, more especially as he was told he should have great difficulty in finding a publisher. No one will publish it for him. They won't touch it. He applied himself to the composition of a work, now in a great measure completed, founded on documents of unquestionable authenticity, and which he should even have wished to print before the secret plan, as fitted in every respect by its important revelations, to secure to the latter the most solid basis in public opinion. But when he was about to publish it, he received from Geneva a letter informing him of a monstrous abuse of confidence. The person he had employed to transcribe his manuscript of the secret plan had copied it in duplicate. He had put the second copy into the hands of a society which, strange to say, had been formed for the express purpose of trafficking in this robbery. The excuse they offered was that since he had during so many years divulged the secret plan of the Jesuits, the thing had become the property of the public. Moreover, as he had transcribed it surreptitiously, it did not belong to him, but it was free to be used by anyone. They're basically stealing it from him. No longer belongs to you, it belongs to everybody else. Us and everybody else. It will scarcely be believed that the spoiler even went so far as to dictate the terms of a bargain to the despoiled, and to add irony to impotence, since work had been printed several days before in Burner, as witness a copy sent him. The incident letter that this person wrote him deserves to be known, and there's a footnote indication there. Here it is. Geneva, September 7th, 1847. Sir, after having so long played with us, it is extremely surprising that you now protest against the publication of a work containing essentially the disclosure of speeches captured without permission by your ears, or rather by your eyes, in 1824. This protest is the more astonishing after you having yourself communicated those speeches to hundreds of persons, so as to make them be regarded as common property. Though I consider your protest as insignificant and as a thing which at most can only result in giving you trouble and making you spend money uselessly, yet on the other hand, since my object has been attained, and since it is from public motives and not for any private interest that I have done so, I now offer to treat with you on the following terms. In case you desire to become the proprietor of this publication, I consent thereto, on condition that you immediately furnish the necessary securities for the complete payment of the printer and of the incidental expenses. I have the honour to salute you. F. Roysinger. So his copy, is he like telling him to pay for that? Or if you try to get it printed, well, you're not going to get anyone out there supporting you or financing you. You have to pay it all yourself, maybe. That's what he's saying. Okay, so what? The very persons who profess themselves such uncompromising enemies of the Jesuits did not themselves refuse to act on a maxim that the end justifies the means. But what had been the result of their spoliation? That it had been of no manner of advantage to them. What confidence, indeed, would there be in a paltry pamphlet without name or warrant for its authenticity? The work, too, they published was but a shapeless abortion, a rough draft of a translation, very imperfectly collated with the original, and what is worse, truncated, slovenly, incorrect, and swarming with mistakes. The edition that the author put forth, was rigorously exact and scrupulous. He had long and minutely scrutinized it, and it had been recorrected under the eye of guides who had helped him convey in French the full force of the original, which is, he says, was often hard to translate. He had subjoined to the secret plan elucidations of great importance, and he had related the circumstances through which it has come to his possession. Finally, he had brought forward counterproofs of various kinds, all drawn from authentic sources, in support of the essential views and ideas developed within the plan. The publication put forth by his spoliators is the more blamable, inasmuch as the manner of its execution had been such as to compromise the fundamental document. For, and the author repeats, what authority can it have without his cooperation, without his name, and the corroborative proofs that accompany it in the present volume? Is it not a culpable and shameful act to put in jeopardy a matter of such moment? If they were actuated by no sort of motives, why did they not apply to him, and offer him the means of giving publicity to his manuscript in the way necessary to secure its full effect? In acting with such bad faith, did they not expose themselves to see the blow they designed for Jesuitism turned back upon them to their confusion? What was to prevent the author from annihilating the result of their manoeuvre? Was it not in his power utterly to discredit the story by attributing it to a freak of his youth? He would say no more. What they had done was put him in a position from which it rested only with himself to derive profit by proving by letters antedated a few years that his design had been to play off a hoax. 3. Those who have at all reflected on the order of the Jesuits, who have studied its history and have had a near view of its workings, will by no means be surprised at its profound artifices and superb hopes. Do we not see it at this moment in France, or that particular time, become the guide of the bishops in giving law to the inferior clergy? M. Henry Martin thus expressed himself in a remarkable work that was recently published. The clergy, in its collective action, is little more than a machine of 40,000 arms, impelled by its leaders against whomsoever they please. And those leaders themselves are pushed forward by the Jesuit and Neo-Catholic congregations. Footmark indicated there. De la France, de Saint-Genis et de ses destinies, Paris 1847, page 92. Well-informed clergymen had assured the author that the Jesuits were never so well seconded and supported as they were at that moment. The establishments dependent on them were very numerous and increased daily. Their resources were prodigious. A letter addressed to the Siècle thus spoke of their progress. Such a letter served well to corroborate what is contained in the secret plan. And the author quotes a greater part of it. Footnote indicated there. December 17th, 1847. The hill of 4 Villiers, which commands Lyons on the right bank of the Saône, is a sort of entrenched camp wherein all the bodies of the clerical militia are echeloned, one above the other in the strongest positions. Thence they hold the town in check, like those formidable fortresses which have been built to intimidate rather than to defend it. The long avenues that lead to 4 Villiers and the chapel that surmounts it are thronged with images of saints and ex voto, and but for that industrious city which unfolds its moving panorama below your feet, you might fancy yourself in the midst of the Middle Ages and take its factory chimneys for convent spires. The exact statistics of the religious establishments of Lyons, with the number of the inhabitants and revenues they command, would form a very curious book, but the archbishopric, which possesses all the elements of those statistics, is by no means disposed to publish them. The clergy, since the severe lessons given it by the July event, likes better to be than to appear. Its force disseminated all over France, and not the less real because they do not show themselves, and it can at any moment, as occasion may arise, set in motion that huge lever, the extremity of which is everywhere and fulcrum at Rome. Now, the soul of this great clerical conspiracy, the vital principle that animates it, is the Jesuits. Everyone knows the well-grounded dislike with which the able and dangerous order is regarded from one end of Europe to the other. Yet it must be owned that in it alone resides all the life of Catholicism at that particular day. And the clergy would be very ungrateful if they did not accept these useful auxiliaries, even while they fear them. All France knew that famous house in the Rue Salat in Lyons, one of the most important centres of Jesuitism. At the period of the pretended dispersion of the order, that great diplomatic victory in which M. Le Comte Rossi won his ambassador's spurs, the house in the Rue Salat, as well as that in the Rue des Postes in Paris, dispersed its inmates for a while, either into the neighbouring dioceses as aides-de-camp to the bishops, or as tutors in some noble houses of the place Bellecour. But when once the farce was played out, things returned very quietly to the old course, and the Rue Salat, at the moment this author wrote, was still with the archbishopric the most active centre of politico-religious direction. That activity was principally directed upon 2 points. By means of the brotherhoods, confréries, it reaches the lower classes whom the clergy drills and holds obedient to it. By education, it gets hold of the middle classes and thus secures to itself the future by casting almost a whole generation in the clerical mould. Let us begin with the brotherhoods. We will say nothing of those that are not essentially Lyonnese, and whose centre is elsewhere, though they possess hosts of affiliated dependents here in that particular area. The author suggests we will merely mention by name the Society for the Propagation of the Faith, whose centre next after Rome is Lyons, and which alone possesses a revenue of 4.5 millions of francs. But the most important, the one which draws its recruits most directly from this industrious population, is the Society of St. Francis Xavier,